Le SIAAP assure une mission de service public pour produire et distribuer de l'eau potable aux habitants de son territoire. En 2020, il dessert 151 communes pour près de 4,7 millions d'usagers. Il distribue 800 millions de litres d'eau par jour, principalement grâce à ses 3 usines de traitement d'eau superficielle de la Seine, la Marne et l'Oise. Le patrimoine du SIAAP inclut par ailleurs 5 usines de production d'eau à partir de nappes souterraines, assurant un service minimum en cas de crise. Il est le plus grand service public d'eau potable français et l'un des tout premiers en Europe. En 2020, le SIAAP a mis en œuvre les moyens nécessaires pour assurer la continuité de ce service public essentiel. La mobilisation sans faille des agents du SIAAP pendant cette période complexe montre son engagement auprès des territoires et des usagers. Il a notamment continué à effectuer plus de 420 000 analyses pour surveiller son eau et garantir une qualité d'eau irréprochable. Dès mars 2020, tous les usagers du SIAAP étaient rassurés sur la qualité de l'eau délivrée, un service essentiel qui l'est encore davantage lorsque les populations sont confinées et au moment où se laver les mains régulièrement est l'un des gestes barrières les plus importants comme rempart contre la transmission de la maladie. Pour assurer la maintenance et le renouvellement régulier de ces infrastructures, le SIAAP a investi 91 millions d'euros en travaux cette année, mais aussi pour soutenir l'activité économique de son territoire. En 2020, le SIAAP a poursuivi ses études visant à étendre la technologie d'osmose inverse basse pression, OIBP, à ses usines d'Arvigny, Méry-sur-Oise, Choisy-le-Roi et Neuilly-sur-Marne. Le projet, vers une eau pure sans calcaire et sans chlore, a pour objectif de délivrer une eau toujours plus pure, très douce, agréable à boire, sans perturbateurs endocriniens et sans résidus plastiques. Le SIAAP poursuit son action pour maintenir sa neutralité carbone et s'inscrire dans les objectifs du plan climat-eau-énergie en réutilisant la chaleur produite par ses installations et en compensant ses émissions résiduelles de gaz à effet de serre. Ces innovations permettent au SIAAP de toujours délivrer une eau d'excellente qualité, au bénéfice de tous, à un prix maîtrisé, en baisse de 10 centimes au 1er janvier 2020, revenu au prix en vigueur en 1998. Acteur de proximité solidaire, le SIAAP se mobilise pour aider les foyers fragilisés sur ces territoires. Il consacre 1% des recettes de vente d'eau, soit 2,5 millions par an, à son programme Eau solidaire. Au-delà des frontières, le SIAAP a contribué en 2020 à 21 opérations dans 14 pays pour plus de 2 millions d'euros. Parce qu'il est un acteur performant, engagé et durable au service des collectivités territoriales et des habitants, le SIAAP entretient et garde la confiance de ses membres. Année d'élection, 2020 salue l'arrivée de nouveaux délégués. 4 sessions de formation leur ont permis de se former au fonctionnement et aux enjeux du service public de l'eau malgré la crise sanitaire. Les nouveaux délégués ont réélu André Santini président et ont engagé leurs réflexions et leurs débats sur le choix du mode de gestion à l'horizon 2024. En s'appuyant sur les études menées en toute transparence par une équipe pluridisciplinaire et indépendante. En anticipant les enjeux d'avenir, le SIAAP se positionne comme un acteur innovant, performant et durable au service des collectivités territoriales et des citoyens.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear participants. Welcome to this session entitled Planning Tools. The session chair is Ms. Mahia Salviti, who is a senior policy analyst at the OECD. Ms. Salviti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is indeed my pleasure to to chair this session on planning tools, especially since the water governance program from the OECD has launched almost a year ago a report on water governance in African cities. So indeed, already focusing its work on water at city level. So today we're going to have 4 speakers that are going to make 4 different presentations. Our first speaker is Mariam Momdian. Welcome. And Mariam is the head of the tariff division of the Tariff Policy Department of the Public Services Regulatory Commission of the Republic of Armenia, where she has worked since 2006. She's a doctor in economic sciences and a lecturer at the Armenian-Russian University in the Business and Management chair. She's engaged in research work related to digitalization of public services and their consequences and impacts in socio-economic terms. So Mariam is going to make a presentation on the role of regulators in assistance of providing of a right to access to a minimum quantity of drinking water. Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's very great pleasure for me also to be present on this conference and knew more about international experience. And I'm going to present a short presentation on the topic, the role of regulators in assistance of providing minimum access of water to customers. Next slide, please. In summary, I want to say that as I am working in regulatory body, it is very difficult for regulators sometimes to find the balance between economic and social factors of regulation in water services, because our regulation, and not only our regulation, is based on finding the minimum required revenue and calculating of revenue required for providing the water supply services to customers. But on the other hand, not every time the customers can pay for this revenue. And a lot of customers may have problems with access of water, drinking water. That's why we have to analyze water strategies of countries, and for this actually responsible the policy makers, which are in our country and in many countries ministries, and we have to planning our regulations according to these water strategies of the country. And the main issues of water policies are, as I have already mentioned, finding the optimal level of ensuring balance between economic and social aspects of water policy. And the second one is how we can achieve it. And the role of regulators is maybe mostly related with the second one. And for these purposes, regulators do the cost-benefit analysis and testing, and doing cumulative calculation of cumulative benefits. We have to estimate the impact of regulation tools on social situation in the country, and how can the results of regulation policy impact of this social economic situation of customers. And in this terms, regulators, the first role of regulators, of course, the setting of tariffs for water supply services. And this means that pricing of water is the first factor that influences on the access or right of access to water services for consumers. Next one, please. We regulators have to take into account, of course, the main principles which are laid on the strategies of countries' water policy or water policies, which are the followings. It's first of it, the development of features, and of course, regulators has to use differentiated approach, taking into account the customers' revenues and the costs which are required for providing services in each region and their specifics. Second one is the principle of providing clarity. All regulators have to organize planning process with taking into account stakeholders' participation, right of their participation, and they have to be open, transparent, and flexible to organize and to organize meetings and meet needs of stakeholders at different regions. Other principles are justice that all planning process in regulation must provide justice, for example, pricing or justice distribution of resources by regions and or through cross customers. And also the other principle is scaling, and planning process should take into account all national and local strategies implementations, scale of these strategies, and provide consistency and flexibility at the national level. These values all integrated in regulatory approaches in our country and are taken into account when we setting tariffs for water supply services. Next one, please. But during their activity, regulators have some limitations. And these limitations are related, for example, with institutional barriers to governance. For example, as I have already mentioned, we have different institutions for regulator and for policy development. And we have some barriers because sometimes the ministry which is responsible for policy in water services has other interests than regulator. That's why we have some barriers or limitations for activity. Second one is related with not enough information and data collection. This is sometimes is related with technological barriers because we have, for example, there are regions where customers cannot, for example, use active technological equipment and other tools, and we have data or we receive data not in time or not the whole data. Other barriers are related with financial barriers. This is mainly related to need of financial resources to do investments in such regions where not all customers have access to drinking water, and these investments can be done only by government, but they cannot provide such enough revenue or profit for suppliers. And here we also have limitations with activity. And of course, the last one is low income of consumers. Next one. So in recent years, all regulators are started to take into account the status of customers, and in process of setting tariff, for example, they are a separate new group of customers, which is called vulnerable customers. And this means that all decisions which are made by a regulator have to be estimated in terms of impact of the status of these customers and regions also. Next one, please. Regulation planning must include assessment of social risk and collection of vulnerability baseline data, which is a big challenge for regulators today. This function requires a lot of resources, human resources, financial resources. Second function includes the regulatory impact assessment and taking into account the impact of regulation on sectoral aspects and regional aspects also, which means that if we set high prices or high tariffs, this can be also has impact, for example, on pricing of other services or goods which are considered to be primary primary consumption. The third one is development of regulatory monitoring and evaluation system. In this stage of digitalization, or in this century, we have to update all our tools and use in our monitoring and evaluation system the all opportunities which provide us sector of information technologies. And also another challenge for regulators is expanding the funding and independence of regulators to set and planning their activity in such way that can be really aimed to targets that are set by regulator and provide efficiency in supply of water services. And also this all must lead to risk reduction and balancing of interests of suppliers and customers, and provide the services for whole groups of customers. So here we can see the factors that are influence on implementation of projects, which are aimed to providing access to water resources. These factors are distance from resource to consumers, system flexibility, incentives through tariffs for suppliers. We have taken into account demand regulation, efficiency, and equality also. Next one. And taking into account all mentioned challenges and factors, I wanted to present shortly the current situation of water sector in Armenia. our government in 2014 stipulated that use and maintenance of water systems will be carried by one operator, supplier company, and this providing of services must be in the framework of public-private partnership during upcoming 50 years by lease transfer. And was organized international tender, and was developed a package of tender documents which include also the terms of license of future leasing company, and the setting of minimum tariffs was the necessary condition for participating and winning in this tender. This tariff was not calculated according to costs. This tariff was a proposal of international organization EauMega, and this basic tariff is adjusted every year, taking into account 4 main factors. Next one, please. I want also tell that this company operate in about half of communities of Armenia. So it means that Armenia has 50 communities, but only 410 are provided by services by this single operator. Some other communities organize providing water services by their resources, and we have a lot of communities which are not provided but by regular water supply in Armenia, unfortunately. And
Mariam, can I ask you to wrap up and conclude, please?
Yes, I'm concluding. These are the, as I have mentioned, the tariff adjustment factors, which are influenced on decision of regulator every year where when we set tariffs. Next one, please. And these are the conclusions, which means that all investments which are done in sector of water services must have an intersectoral nature, and they are included in tariff. They must provide multiple benefits for different customers and also for government, and they must be effective by regions and take into account stakeholders' needs. And in this regulator process, all regulation decisions must be adopted, taking into account social impact of these decisions. Thank you. If you have questions, will be glad to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mariam. Actually, we're going to take the Q&A after the 4 presentations. But that's a perfect transition for me, reminding to the audience that they can ask their questions through the chat and through the Q&A that is available, and I will be very happy to be their voice to read out aloud their questions. So right away, without further ado, we're going to move to the next presentation by Uche Okpena, who is a Nigerian PhD student in the School of Natural Resources in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, USA. His research work is at the intersection of landscape, eco-hydrology, nutrient dynamics and ecological stoichiometry. I hope that I said all that right. And so Uche is going to be presenting on the influence of landscape changes on urban catchment flow with a case study. So Uche, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Miriam. Hi, good day all. My name is Uchechukwu Obena, and I'm a PhD student at the School of Natural Resources, University of Nebraska, Lincoln, US. So today I'll be presenting on the influence of landscape changes on urban catchment flow, a case study of Wari or Tamari catchment in Owerri, southeastern Nigeria. This is actually an extract from my master's thesis. So please, next slide. So the summary presents just the structure of the presentation. You have the background to the study, the statement of problem, aim and objectives, results, and recommendation. Next slide, please. So basically, like we all know, like most cities, I just took a quick look at the OECD city snapshots. It talks about the same thing in Nigeria, but it's solely focused on Abuja, that is the capital of Nigeria. But, this is also another city in Nigeria. So, there's this relative change according to the United Nations. By 2050, we'll have a 27% relative change, that is transition from rural to urban areas. So it poses a whole lot of environmental issues, and water-related issues are one of them. So, so natural systems also try to respond to these distortions associated with relative change, that is the movement from rural to transition from, rural to urban areas. So, some of these effects could be change in water quality, also change in water quantity. So, like it's expected, Owerri also is experiencing that. And, if for the people who may know some Nigeria to an extent, there has been these frequent issues or increase in flood-related cases. So Owerri from 1977 has experienced a 70% change, 77% change from the farmland, slash light vegetation being converted to, built up areas. And, you can imagine the effect it will have on our ecosystem. Next slide, please. So the statement of problems. So addressing these negative effects, most times we tend to treat the issue from we just look at it from the symptom perspective, just trying to treat the symptom. During emergencies, we try to make provisions. So we don't really understand the mechanism and try to address it from the root. So it's usually done at the surface because, there was flooding, so what do we need to do? But nobody talks about the processes that led to that flooding. What do we need to do and all that? So that formed the major base for this research. So, and also these interactions are quite complex, so we need an integrated framework to manage this, this issue. So next slide, please. So, this is just a brief description of the study area. You could see it's on the southeastern part of Nigeria, and all that in a state called Imo State. And you have, I looked at two water bodies, one is the Wari River, the other is the Otamiri River. And also we looked at the rainfall patterns, we looked at flood responses, we looked at the land use, land cover, change, distribution and change patterns. And also we tried to characterize the, catchment itself and also the related drainages. So next slide, please. So basically our results, found out that, it's a presentation of some of our results. So basically the catchment is an elongated catchment. So, and also it has the subcatchments, the subcatchment 11 is the subcatchment with the most flooding hazard or hazard potential or potential to flood rather. So because it has the highest peak flow, and unfortunately, it may not be so clear depending on what you have on your screen. So pardon me for that. So Also, the stream order, which was calculated, showed that this is the third order stream, or a third order catchment, which shows that there are not really much drainages draining the area. So, which also has its implications. Next slide, please. So, if you look at this in a clockwise direction, there are some. So you see that the dark orange or brown patches are basically the built-up areas. So you could see this expansion, from your left to your right, down to your downward left is, from the top left is the 1977 data or satellite imagery that we use to classify, the land use, land cover, in this area. So you could see the green patches, the light green patches are the light vegetations and the farmlands. So the brown patches are the built up, at least these are basic land covers or land use types that you could see clearly. So if you look at your top left, you find out that that was what it used to be in 1977. Then your top right is what it used to be in 2006. Then your bottom left is what it used to be in 2012, and your bottom right is what it used to be in 2018. So you could imagine what has happened, the level of urbanization as a result of demographic change that has led to this, and also its implication is now what we address. So between 1977, there has been this change, the land use land cover type lost more, and the built up had the highest rate of annual change, which was at 9.13%. Between 2006 to 2012, we found out that also light vegetations lost, to mainly built up areas. But in this case, road networks had the highest rate of annual change, and this was followed by thick vegetation. So these changes also has its ecological implication, most importantly in the aquatic ecosystems. So between 2012 to 2018, it still remained that, it still maintained that light vegetations were also being taken up for several other reasons. And in this case, water bodies had this highest, fastest rate of change. This is because also, as at this time, people have started mining at the river banks, excavating sand for, still the purpose of building and, road constructions and all that. So these water bodies tend to spread into those excavated areas, the hungry water effect. So they run into them to cover up before, they flow downwards. So next slide, please. So this is just a summary, table summarizing the land cover distribution over time. So please, next slide. So in the annual rainfall, rainfall analysis between 1974 to 2008, we had a mean annual rainfall of 2,346.59 millimeters. And the lowest was, in 1998, which was 1,641.5 millimeters, and the highest was 2,916.70. But, in this whole scenario, there was no trend. We could not establish any trend at all. We could not say if it was going high, if it was reducing. So it was slightly difficult to say, okay, this, will be the trend. So we analyzed the data based on, our simulation was based on this data, not really based on a specific trend. So next slide, please. So, from our hydrological response, which integrated both the population data, which we use to understand the level of imperviousness, and we used the population data and the land use data to understand the level of imperviousness, and also used it as a parameter for our simulation. So we found out that the highest catchment with the highest peak flow, so rather peak runoff, was catchment 11, which was, I think, the largest catchment. And so from our simulation, we found out that we had as at 1977, we had 4.94 meter cube per second flow as discharge. That was what it used to be as at 1977, based on our simulation, but the actual discharge was 5.88 cubic meters per second. So this was, we could say that this was a relatively low discharge compared to what we had now, or what we had in 2016. There was this from 5.88, or rather, based on our simulation, from 4.94 cubic meters per second, there was an increase in discharge to 22.95 cubic meters per second. That is after 26 years. So we could see the rates at which this, there was an increase in discharge. So what was causing this discharge? Obviously, the increased level of imperviousness. So there was no filtration. There was no infiltration. Most of the rainfall poured out into the system. So the question is, can the drainages, do they have the carrying capacity for this amount of flow? So what do that is one of the questions we're also trying to address. So in 2012, there was also a slight decrease, but also an increase relative to what it used to be in 1977. We are suspecting, we are not quite sure, it is still part of the experiment we'll be carrying out with my professors back in Nigeria. So we are suspecting that this may be a function of the increase in excavation, which, like I said, we are only suspecting. But in 2018, there was also an increase to 23.09 cubic meters per second as discharge. So these scenarios do not only have issues, only have implications on the ecosystem, it also has implications on the humans. These flows, this increase in flooding incidents will lead to loss of lives, loss of properties, loss of ecosystem services and all that. So next slide, please. So, we concluded by saying that this research provides us with the background, to understand how these changes in land use, land cover will alter hydrological flows in an engaged catchment using simple tools. Basically what we use to save costs and everything, we use remote sense data that most of them were available. We used already existing data from the river basin authorities and, all that, then try to run some simulations and, get them to tie with what is already existing so that we could make informed decision. So the research calls for the need to understand how these changes and responses will affect. I'm more interested in the ecological structures and functions for the purpose of developing sound ecological engineering approach to address these issues. So understanding the effects of ecological structures and function will aid the development of sustainable approaches and policies that will address these issues, while also improving ecosystem services that can be derived from this area. Because I can tell you, when you take a detailed look at other literatures, you'll find out some of these ecosystem services, there used to be the Otami River used to be a form of source water for the area. But, if you go there, I can tell you the water quality has seriously degraded, and nobody really cares about, policies are not being made to address this issue. So the next slide. Okay, so thank you for your attention. My email is here. If there's any question, I'll also wait around to attend to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uche, for this very interesting presentation. And we'll definitely get back to it during the Q&A session.
Right.
Right now, I'll move on to the next speaker and the next presentation. That will be Eloisa Soares de Moura Costa. She's a professor at the Department of Geography of the Federal University of Minas Gerais. She has a degree in architecture and urbanism from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, a master degree in urban planning, architectural association, and a PhD in demography from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Geography of the University of California at Berkeley. Her research areas include urban planning, urban geography, public policies, and socio-environmental implications. And so your presentation, Eloisa, is going to be about water and land, culture and society. How can they come together in metropolitan planning? Some thoughts from a Brazilian experience. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for selecting this paper, which was done by myself and my other three colleagues, Geraldo Costa, Nilo Nascimento, and Vanessa Cansado, all of them from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and all of them shared the experience I'm going to talk about. Okay, next, please. So this is the summary of the presentation and the paper, an introduction with the main assumptions, a little bit of our metropolitan planning process, some information about the catchment, and we concentrate then on some examples on the planning at the local level, which means the municipal level, and then conclusions and thoughts. Next, please. So the main assumptions and principles. The first one that moved us is the idea that water and land policies and politics are always closely connected. And also that when we talk about metropolitan areas in the South, we are talking about rapid and intense urbanization, which is marked by social informality and inequity, and also where environmental, social, and territorial policies are always harder to apply. Usually, the role of nature in urbanization is marked by invisibility, disregard, and subordinations, always with technical solutions prevailing, and prevention and protective measures are hard to implement. But we can see a shift in the last decades in the direction of environmental and urban regulation in terms of conception of projects, definition of natural territorial boundaries, the catchment usually, adoption of methodologies of participatory planning, which I'll develop further in this presentation. The idea that inclusive governance is an empowering process and a key element to maintain collective achievements, and also to face private and corporate pressures over water and land. So our evidence comes from the metropolitan region of Belo Horizonte through a participatory metropolitan planning process that was carried out within our university, together with metropolitan municipal authorities and civil society organizations. Next, please. A little bit of our metropolitan planning process. The metropolitan region has 34 municipalities, almost 6 million inhabitants in a 10,000 square kilometers territory. And the planning process ran through 3 phases along these 10 years. And there was a metropolitan plan followed by a macro zoning project. And after that, the revision of local master plans of 11 out of these 34 municipalities. It generated many integrated policies, programs, and projects, and many of them related to the environment. I have not the time to go through all them, but in the paper you can have some more details. The methodology combined technical and academic knowledge with the residents' lived experience. And we talked about, and we managed to use two planning tools. One is the establishment of zones of metropolitan interests, where metropolitan interests prevailed over local ones, which were defined by land use environmental protection, like drinking water catchments, landscapes, environmental heritage, infrastructure, centralities. And the second tool was the green and blue fabric or green and blue network, La Trame Verte Bleue, inspired by the French experience, where urbanization and nature are converging as a major territorial restructuring proposal, which intends to increase the metropolitan region's resilience and the management of planning tools, plus some adaptation to climate change. All of this was detailed at municipal level. Next, please. So we select one of the catchments, which is a zone of metropolitan interest, the Serra Azul catchment, which is one of the main sources of drinking water for the metropolitan region, supplying sort of 14% of the population. And it is a strict protection zone area, which contributes directly to the reservoir and has sort of almost 70% of areas of native vegetation. It includes 4 municipalities, including the 2 ones that I'm going to mention, Igarapé and Mateus Leme. The catchment has a lot of traditional agriculture. Rural producers are usually the target of a program focusing on monetary payment for ecosystem service. It's a very interesting program in Igarapé, which is called the Guardian Project, which is financed and promoted by the municipality and the National Water Agency. But also the region is the target of a new real estate parceling, mainly with irregular groundwater withdrawal systems, inadequate sanitation, low density urbanization, lots of processes leading to deforestation and erosion. And also mining, urbanization, conventional agriculture are seen as the main threats for the sustainable use of land and water and for environmental protection in the catchment. So the TVA approach that we adopted is seen as a more sustainable development alternative for the area. Next, please. And the planning process at the municipal level, which is the revision of master plans, was mainly oriented by the following items, which is that the planning was relied on horizontal social relations, uniting technical knowledge and knowledge emanated from daily life, and is committed, at least we intended to, social, political, economic, and environmental transformation. We intended to see citizens as planning subjects, not our planning objects. And the revision of the master plans focuses were the inclusive governance and the TVA discussed along the process, especially when the metropolitan interest zones were discussed and demarcated. The figure on the side shows both the fabric proposed by the TVA in green and the municipalities where we had the plans reviewed. And also this TVA was legitimized by a state bill integrating the metropolitan plan and its macro zoning to attend a federal law, which is the Metropolitan Statute. Next, please. So the debate on the governance implied a participatory process plus the creation of a municipal monitoring group, which is called the Grupo de Acompanhamento, which has a parity composition between state representatives and civil society representatives. And this group, after the plan, it is meant to become the city committee, which is the major municipal planning institution. So those master plans, they contributed with innovative tools for municipal planning. And the paper highlights how the TVA as a new territorial restructuring project by including the idea of social function of nature, going beyond the usual land use instruments, which are centered to achieve the social function of urban property and land, as another city statute, another federal law determines. So the elaboration of master plans focused on the idea of integrated planning, particularly relating water and land policies and politics, and the idea of planning as a process, not as a product only. Next, please. So we chose one example of one of the municipalities, which is Mateus Leme, within that catchment, by which we could show the close connection between policies and politics related to water and land. And the master plan of Mateus Leme showed an extensive and diversified TVA, Trame Verte Bleu, which is a rich and complex participatory process. In this process, we could also make arise various conflicts related both to water and land. The municipality is located in the southern border of the Serra Sul catchment, has 30,000 inhabitants and 90% of which urban. A significant part of the territory is environmental protection area because of water and the reservoir, the natural heritage, mountains and forests. But also it is where we have many conventional agricultural uses and a lot of pressure for new developments. So the TVA proposal shows also the diversity, but also complexity. Water, vegetation, uses related to leisure, pedestrian mobility, and other sustainable uses. So the conception is that it's not just a green and blue infrastructure, but has more culture and other uses. Next, please. I will not read all this, but the slide gives you an example of the internal zoning of the TVA, relating all these uses, the protection use, the fluvial use, the agroecological use, cultural use, mining territories, which are very strong there, a lot of mining pressure. Also places of cultural interest, linear park, roads related to that, cycling, pedestrian routes, tourism, landscape, etc. So this is just to give an idea of the complexity of the TVA and how it encompasses the whole territory. Next, please. And so in the master plan, there is a quotation which I will read. The TVA is a project of territorial restructuring corresponding to the integration of natural, urban, and rural elements throughout the municipal territory of the metropolitan region for the fulfillment of the social function of the city and social function of property. And when mapped, which is the map on the right, the TVA represents a significant portion of the territory, which gives a false idea that everything would be environmental protection areas and no other use could be permitted. But if we look at the left map, we can see the idea that the TVA encompasses a lot of functions. So, but also the TVA proposal also unfolded conflicts and resistance, emerging in workshops and participatory discussions, mainly related to the definition of rural and urban uses, the directions of urban expansions and land use, and very strong pressures from property capital over rural and protected areas. Two examples that we develop in the paper are related to disputes over land uses in Serra do Elefante, which is a hill, where issues related to protection versus urban development were very strong, and another dispute between agroecological incentives in rural areas against traditional agrochemical intensive agriculture. So this is also a main conflict that emerges. Next, please.
Lisa, can I ask you to conclude? That's perfect.
Okay, so to conclude, the TVA is not just an urbanistic linear park project, but a broad concept of territorial restructuring. The TVA approach, including ecosystem service, brings possible responses to climate-related threats, storms, floods, droughts, landslides, etc., and benefits related to biodiversity, habitability, microclimate regulation, public health, and social cohesion. But the TVA can also create or exacerbate social spatial inequalities and face political resistance associated with land and water use restrictions. So the TVA requires the articulation of different planning tools to avoid environmental injustice and situations of green gentrification. The acceptance of the TVA requires changes of view over nature-urbanization relations by all social agents, municipal civil servants, social movements, individual societies in general. So next, please. Thank you. That's it. I'm ready to take questions or clarifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eloisa, for this great presentation. We'll definitely get back to you with questions that are starting to arrive and pop up in the chat. Thanks a lot. So we'll move on now to our last but not least, obviously, speaker, and that is Amanda Carvalho. So she is a graduate student at the Nuclear and Energy Research Institute. She has a bachelor degree in international relations from the University of Brasilia. She was an intern at the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil. And in 2019, she participated to the UN Youth Climate Summit with the UNESCO delegation as a panelist in the nature-based solutions section. So Amanda Carvalho is going to be presenting on water and climate in megacities and the contribution of nuclear science and technology to ecosystems and their services. So Amanda, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. So I'll just start. Next slide, please. The loss of the services provided by ecosystems affects the well-being of people and compromises the development in its multiple dimensions. In megacities, the promotion of human well-being and the conservation and restoration of ecosystems and their services are urgent global challenges. In a predominantly urban world, more than half of the global population occupies only 1% of the planet. These spaces rapidly compromise already scarce resources and place water security at the center of the 2030 agenda. With the recognition of the role of science in the development of solutions that increase urban resilience in megacities, our study aims to assess the application of nuclear science and technology for the conservation, evaluation, and recovery of ecosystem services in its contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. Our study addresses the growing use and application of nuclear science and technology for the conservation, assessment, and restoration of ecosystems and their services, and it also focuses on water security and climate change. Tools based on nuclear science provide solutions for the development of climate-smart agricultural methods, the study of terrestrial, aquatic, and atmospheric systems, monitoring how climate change affects the environment and greenhouse gases routes, and their distribution and impact on ecosystems, among other aspects. Nuclear technologies are used for wastewater treatment, identification of pollution sources, studies on the quality and quantity of water resources, and adaptation to climate change, the demystification of nuclear science and technology, and the increasing collaboration between the ecosystem services and nuclear areas and society as a whole are fundamental for facing the global challenges related to water and climate change in large cities. So for our study to determine the links between ecosystem services and the nuclear field, we systematized information obtained from official records of the International Atomic Energy Agency, available on its website, and publications on the application of nuclear and isotopic tools for the treatment of environmental issues, with a focus on the evaluation, recovery, and conservation of ecosystem services. We correlated the data to the state and trends of ecosystem services, which is the benchmark of the study. We addressed the urbanization processes and analyzed the convergence between nuclear science technology contribution to the ecosystem services and the Sustainable Development Agenda, and established a correlation with the SDG 11, which is Sustainable Cities and Communities. Next, please. So water security is especially significant for large urban agglomerations, especially megacities. By concentrating the demand of millions of people in small areas, the stress of the finite supply of fresh water available near urban agglomerations is increased. Water security is one of the key elements of the 2030 agenda, either because it is a goal of its own, SDG 6, which is ensuring the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, or because it is part of a series of targets linked to other SDGs related to health, cities, consumption, marine resources, and terrestrial ecosystems. In a global analysis of the vulnerability of the urban surface water supply, Podolsky and Gorelik distinguished vulnerable cities, which are those exceeding minimal limits for human, environmental, and storage requirements, from threatened cities, those exceeding some, but not all of the three limits. The authors assessed vulnerability in a baseline condition of 2010 and future scenario of 2040 for 7 cities in 39 countries, with the surface water supply, no diversity of water sources, and more than 750,000 inhabitants. The impact of climate change was not considered. They found out that 35% of the large cities were vulnerable in 2010, with an estimated increase of 45% in 2040. Most of the cities are supplied by rivers with such low flow rates that they have already experienced chronic water scarcity. As seen in the table, the number of vulnerable cities will increase from 25 to 31 by 2040, which is an increase of 24%. To mitigate water scarcity, especially in large urban centers, in addition to investment in infrastructure and adequate governance, the protection and recovery of ecosystems responsible for water production and reserves is very much necessary. Next one, please. So the benefits that nature can provide are called ecosystem services, according to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, or nature's contribution to people, according to Diaz et al. Ecosystem services of water are presented in Figure 1, and they refer to provision, regulation, cultural and support services, and they play a fundamental role for humans and the maintenance of all the benefits provided by nature. In this figure, we can see water in the context of ecosystem services and its relation with human well-being. Even with a growing demand for ecosystem services, there is also an increasingly dramatic degradation of the capacity of ecosystems to provide them. This framework, together with the need for water management, that integrates the trend of current and future impacts, such as climate change, requires innovations and changes to science-based approaches that increase urban resilience and contribute to the 2030 agenda. Next, please. The least developed countries and regions, the worst large urban agglomerations, and the poorest people who depend directly on access to ecosystems are the most affected by the degradation of their services. The steady decline in the capacity of ecosystems to provide their services contributes to increasing inequalities and disparities between groups and populations, with implications to the level of success of the Sustainable Development Goals, which will differ widely among countries and regions. The environmental dimension of the 2030 Agenda enables the adoption of integrated actions with an impact on the economy and social aspects of sustainable development and vice versa. When considering the commitments of the agenda, which recognize the interdependence between poverty eradication, combat of inequalities, preservation of the planet, sustainable economic development, and social inclusion, innovative tools need to be appropriated by the global communities to achieve these goals. Nuclear science is an area that enables the development of innovative strategies for the 2030 Agenda. The application of isotopics and nuclear techniques contribute to the achievement of SDGs 2, 6, 7, 9, 13, 14, and 15, which are respectively zero hunger, clean water and sanitation, clean and affordable energy, industry, innovation and infrastructure, climate action, life below water, and life on Earth, which necessarily depend on the recovery and conservation of ecosystems and their services. To support the assessment of the nuclear science technology scope for building resilient cities, we correlated the information on the application of nuclear and isotopic tools to address environmental issues with the goals of the SDG 11, which is Sustainable Cities and Communities, which aims to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, and that have a direct relation with ecosystems and the services. So this we see in the table, the goal, strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, and how the nuclear science and technology can contribute to this goal. Studies and applications of nuclear techniques for quality and quantity of water resources, surface and underground, use of nuclear and isotopic tools to study the impact of the movement of pollutants in terrestrial environments and the endangerment of ecosystem services. I won't read everything because of the time, but these are just some examples of how the technologies we have in nuclear science can contribute to these specific goals. And the correlations presented on the table show the importance of using and applying nuclear science-based tools to address challenges to environmental protections, water availability, and climate change in urban spaces. Stable isotopes and nuclear techniques are used to assess freshwater resources, biological systems, atmospheric processes, and ocean ecosystems, as well as to assess impacts on the environment, particularly the fingerprints of natural and man-made pollution, and to study the process in which pollutants are integrated into biological, geological, and chemical cycles. Nuclear technologies provide solutions to help combat hunger and malnutrition, improve environmental sustainability. In Africa, cassava cultivation using improved methods in nuclear science has tripled the productivity by applying nitrogen isotopes to monitor water and fertilizer use. As large urban centers rely on urban and peri-urban agriculture for food supply, the application of nuclear techniques can promote better land and water use and optimize production in order to contribute to sustainable regional development and resilience of cities. Water security is a critical issue for human development and for megacities and their environmental and economic sustainability. Nuclear isotopic techniques provide important information on water sources and methods for their recovery and conservation, as well as the human impact on the climate. Since land-based sources of pollution, notably those from larger urban settlements, account for about 77% to 100% of marine pollution, nuclear and isotopic techniques can mitigate their impacts. Although nuclear scientists and researchers in the ecosystem services area conduct studies on ecosystems and their services, these two areas of knowledge are working in an isolated and segmented manner, and their approximation is urgent. It is also urgent to expand the development of science-based technologies and bring the academic community closer to decision makers in order to adopt strategies based on these technologies that reflect the latest innovations and are integrative, adaptable to change, technically sound, and financially viable. Next, please.
Amanda, can I ask you to wrap up and conclude? Perfect. Thank
you. Considering the intrinsic relationship between sustainable development goals and ecosystem services, the approach to the urban context highlights the challenge of achieving a universal agenda for sustainability and resilience that reaches a population that grows rapidly and which influences and is influenced by the concentrated occupation of territory. The depletion of natural resources and their impact on humanity, notably freshwater scarcity and its multiple consequences, amplifies the list of challenges facing humanity. In this complex context, the nuclear science and technology are tools to achieve sustainable development goals in areas such as energy, human health, food production, environmental protection, management, conservation, and environmental and water resource recovery. In addition to integration between nuclear scientists and researchers in the ecosystem services area, it is necessary to approach the scientific community with decision makers so that the governments of the world's megacities can promote supportive environments for the application of science-based tools for the recovery and conservation of ecosystems and their services. Innovative strategies and approaches are especially urgent for urban water resilience, which includes a broad process of popularizing science for its use, especially nuclear science and technology. Next, please. And that's it. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for your presentation. Thanks a lot. I'll start right away the Q&A session with the questions that have popped up in the chat. So let me read the question that is directed to Uche. Uche, the question is what is the type of remote sensing data that is being used in the Nigerian study area?
Okay, basically we use the Google Earth, the remote sensing data came from Google Earth, but that of 1977 was an aerial photograph that was gotten from the government here.
Okay, and the other question that I have in the chat, I think it's for you, Eloisa. It's about if the master plans were old and outdated, then the question is, what do we use in urban planning in order to properly consider the population expansion?
Okay, thank you. In Brazil, master plans are laws, municipal laws. So even if a master plan is outdated, until it is renewed or another law would replace it partially, it continues to have to be obeyed or at least taken in consideration. But also, every 10 years, they have to be renewed. So it's 10 years, not such a long time in terms of urban planning. But of course, lots of things occur outside the plans, even if the plan is new. It depends on the dynamics of the agents. And so municipal planning has also other instruments or tools that they can put forward to try to, or to avoid, or to adequate new expansions. But it's always a very conflictuous subject.
Thank you very much. I have another question directed to Mariam. So the question is about the planning process that you mentioned in your presentation, and saying that the planning process is open and transparent, and that there is an engagement with the stakeholders. I wanted to ask you which stakeholders do take part in this planning process. Is it state representatives? Is it local representatives? Is it water user associations? So what kind of stakeholders attend those engagement processes during the planning? So that's the first question. And the second question, Mariam, would be about the data that you said sometimes the data is missing, or it is being reported, but sometimes too late. So how do you manage? How does the regulator manage when the data is coming in too late or is missing? Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your questions. Regarding first question, according to our law, regulator before setting prices and tariffs and making decisions which have impact on social economic status of consumers have to organize open meetings with stakeholders. These stakeholders are representatives both of local and national government and representative of consumers, especially according to our law. All NGOs which are has activity in sphere of consumer right protecting must participate in these meetings and present the needs of consumers. And also our meetings are open for all stakeholders who are interested in these decisions. Regarding second question, these data mainly related to consumption volumes and quantities, because our consumers have to take photos of their account equipment and send by email or by other technological opportunity they have, and not every consumer, especially in region, have this ability and resources. That's why a regulator organized monitoring of checking these quantities of consumption, and every year, about 1 month, representatives of regulator and Ministry of Energy Resources and Territorial Development of Armenia organize monitoring and check the data. Also, we are encourage investments in this digitalization of water supply services and changing information between supplier and consumers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very complete answers, Mariam. Thank you a lot. I have other questions for Uche and Eloisa, maybe, because I thought that the case studies that you shared with us, was very interesting, highlighting like the mega trends such as demographic change, urbanization, climate change that are exacerbating some water risks and the pressure on the water, both in terms of quality and quantity. And you have both highlighted the necessity for a cross-sectoral coherence of policies, and especially between the water policy and land use policy. And I would also maybe add also of waste management policy. And I wanted to ask both of you in both your case studies, is there any tool, any mechanism that is in place to help coordinate those different policies like water policy and land use policy? Any tool in place, any attempt to coordinate those policies and to align them to some extent or to make them coherent? So I don't know, maybe Eloisa first?
Okay, that's a very difficult question and very necessary. I think that in the paper or in the law, we have lots of tools and instruments, and also participatory instances like city committees and even water basin committees that are the main places where this cross-section coherence is can flourish or can be sewed up. But it depends very much on the willingness also of the councillors and all the mayors and etc. to stimulate this and make it happen. And I think that in the places where this happens, or in the periods of time when this happens, it's very interesting and we can improve a lot. But if there isn't political or even technical willingness, it collapses. We have some examples of policies, even local policies, that they change if the mayor changes and this sort of things. Although the instruments are there, I usually say that we have a very advanced environmental and urban legislation, which sort of provides all the scopes for all this to happen. But sometimes, as we say here, they don't get fixed. So it's not usually being in the regulatory realm is not always enough. We have always to have the political understanding and this sort of things. And also, I would like to say that as we are talking about metropolitan areas, we have also a metropolitan agency that is the place to coordinate, or at least to stimulate the coordination of those actions. And in a sense, sometimes they manage to do that accordingly, but not always. So it's also a new agency that needs to be reinforced and be more strong and have more staff and people who could also always be pushing these policies forward and laterally as well.
Thank you very much. Uche, can I extend the question to your case study?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, to the best of my knowledge, some of these policies are there, but I would say there are no integrative framework, to address these, because I know there is the Land Use Act in the Imo State, that is where my study area is. And there is this watershed management plan that says you don't, you live 150 meters from the river bank, vegetated, you don't go and all. But yeah, who monitors them? Efforts are not really made to monitor them. And I know you have the Capital Development Agency, who also ought to look out for this, but there is no synergy. So the Capital Development Agency is more concerned about buildings, but not the effect of where the buildings are located and all that. So then the riparian, the water management authority is more concerned about trying to provide drinking water, but not really, so they are just on their own. There is no synergy, so you don't have that integrated framework. And also research efforts are being made. Then you now talk about the political power to implement some of the findings and all that. So I think, I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. No, thank you very much. And actually, the issues that you're underlining are the issues that we've been witnessing, in the results and the outcomes of the work that the OECD has been doing on water governance in African cities. There is definitely, but just like in many cities around the world, there is definitely an issue of consistency through sectoral policies. But obviously, in the context of those mega trends affecting heavily water quality and quantity, this has a greater impact, I would say, definitely. If I may, Eloisa, ask you another quick question, because we only have a few minutes left. It's really my curiosity, to know just a little bit more about the payment for ecosystem services scheme that you mentioned, that was funded, if I remember properly, by the municipalities and the national agency. If you could say just a quick words of description of this scheme.
Okay, this is a very interesting scheme. We have a major example that is always studied in a municipality called Extrema, which is in the limits from Minas Gerais and São Paulo, which is a very well-known ecosystem service policy. But this one I mentioned is one of the municipalities, which is called, well, it doesn't matter. The municipal environmental secretary put forward a program together with local farmers, so to orient them so that they would protect the water sources and advise them on what to plant and how to protect the water sources that are within their area, and how not to use agrochemicals and this sort of things. And so with the support of the municipal secretary, the farmers started to enter in the project, and many springs have been recovered, and it was very successful. And they received a payment in cash by the end of the year, and which is not a lot, but it's enough for them to continue in the program. And although I have mixed feelings about these things of paying cash for something that people should do because it's environmental protection, but anyway, it works quite well, and maybe it could be replicated in the whole catchment with this sort of things. But so far, it's just a municipal experience.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a quick question also for Amanda, if you don't mind, Amanda. It's just to let us know about the further development of your research work and your plans, on pushing forward your reflection and research on the area of the contribution of nuclear science and technology to ecosystem and ecosystem services.
Hi. So I'm actually pretty new to the whole part of nuclear science and technology. So this study was more of an assessment of ways that nuclear science and technology has already been contributing to the protection of the environment and to water security, and how this can help to achieve the sustainable development goals. So it was more like a documental research, but there's also a lot of ways to improve this. And I don't know, I think we could do studying a bit more of depth later, but for now this is what we had.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of that session, and I want to thank you all for your presentations and for answering the questions and taking part in the Q&A session. Thank you very much to all of you. We will I guess be able to access the presentation later on, I guess, on the platform. So thank you again for the presentation of the planning tools and the case studies that you have shared with us. To my mind, I'm obviously reflecting also on the work that the OECD is doing on water governance at city level, and definitely you have highlighted how some very key megatrends are exacerbating water risks and threatening water security in many areas of the world. So I really want to thank you for that. And I'll give the floor back to Xixi to close the session, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Saviti, and all the speakers for the very interesting presentation. And thanks to all the participants for your attention and interest. That will be all for this session. We wish you a good evening, and thanks to everyone again.
Notre époque connaît des changements sans précédent. L'activité humaine augmente, les villes s'étendent. Aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, l'eau a besoin de nous. Le traitement de l'eau, c'est notre responsabilité. Une histoire d'hommes, de femmes, faite d'engagement et de savoir-faire. C'est notre histoire au SIAAP. Nous collectons, transportons et dépolluons les eaux usées de 9 millions de franciliens. Notre réseau de 440 km de canalisation est géré en temps réel, avec des outils de prévision et de régulation qui nous permettent d'anticiper toutes les situations et d'optimiser la gestion des flux. 7 jours sur 7, 24 heures sur 24. Chaque jour, dans nos usines, nous traitons 2,5 millions de mètres cubes d'eau usée. Grâce à un savoir-faire et des équipements uniques en Europe. Notre vision est durable, tournée vers le long terme. Nous nous engageons à développer notre activité industrielle de manière responsable. Nous investissons régulièrement dans la modernisation de nos usines et dans le développement de solutions innovantes et protectrices de l'environnement. Chacun de nous, dans son métier, se sent porteur du service public et de l'intérêt général, au service de notre mission, la préservation du milieu naturel et de la biodiversité. Au SIAAP, nous sommes fiers d'être une entreprise publique forte de 40 ans d'expérience au service de l'agglomération parisienne. Et nous sommes plus de 1700 agents à partager cet engagement et cette passion. Pour aujourd'hui et pour demain.